Who are you going to believe? Every mainstream media source or Mollie Hemingway at The Federalist? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, Mollie Hemingway has a piece where she documents how every major news source in the country said some specific things about the incident involving President Trump's walk from the White House through Lafayette Park to a church where he posed with a Bible in his hand. And there are a lot of aspects to this incident, Bill, and I just want to focus in particular upon the difficulty for people who weren't there, in other words, me and you and the rest of our viewers, in evaluating truth claims. Hemingway's basic beef with the mainstream media was that they all reported that the park police and perhaps the Secret Service violently cleared the space so the president could walk to the church. And specifically, they referred to deployment of tear gas canisters, as well as the fact that the reaction of law enforcement was unprovoked. Hemingway tries to document quite the opposite, that in fact the park police themselves released a statement. Acting Chief Gregory Monahan official statement basically said that the reaction of his officers was provoked in a variety of ways. Number one, there was pre-existing intelligence that there might be crowd violence at this event, that some people were trying to stir up violence. Number two, they found caches of bottles and bats and metal poles hidden along the way. Number three, at about 6:33 p.m., which is in advance of the 7 p.m. D.C. curfew ordered by the mayor of Washington, D.C., some in the crowd began to throw projectiles, including bricks and frozen water bottles and some caustic liquids. So the idea of being unprovoked is refuted by the park police as well as Mollie Hemingway. And I'll deal with the other part later. But first of all, Bill, when you read these counter narratives, and especially because everybody is on one side of the narrative and it's Mollie on the other side, how are we expected to make non-eyewitness sense of all of this?
It may be everybody on one side and Mollie on the truth on the other side. And in that case, Mollie wins. This is the argument that we've had many times. We've had this argument many times on the show about science, about this idea of the science is settled and so on. One guy with a theory that is repeatable and verifiable, especially quantifiable by mathematics, and his experiments continue to prove him right, then all the other experts in the world are wrong. And this is obviously why people on the conservative side of the spectrum don't trust anything in the media, because it's not just a question of biased reporting. It's a question of leaving out obviously, exculpating facts. It's obviously leaving out elements of the story that provide some kind of perspective to the story, and they won't have that. They're basically making this up as they go along. And the problem with this is not just for conservatives. The problem is that they have managed, the mainstream media, by tricks like this, let me not just say tricks, let me just say willful omissions. They have not only destroyed their credibility with the left, they have destroyed the entire idea of news credibility. And now it's just, that's CNN, or that's just Fox. And now the country is once more divided down the middle, because the people who watch networks like this assume, you would imagine, that if elements of those stories were true, they'd be in the stories. And since they weren't in the stories, they're not true. But then again, along comes somebody like Mollie and much more importantly, the chief of police, who presumably stumbled upon these caches of whatever you want to call it, riot material, and is more credible in that regard than somebody who might be a blogger, although she could have been there and discovered it firsthand herself, for all I know.
Now, Bill, the point is, conservatives, though, would be great advocates of the U.S. Constitution and its amendments, one of which is the freedom of the press, and skeptics of the power of government and the state to use force to oppress the individual. And so when you hear on the one side the free press saying, here's what we heard from the front lines and some of us actually witnessed. And on the other side, we have the state saying, no, that's not the way it happened. Why is it that conservatives immediately rush to the side of the state and defend it?
Because it's the side that's got the truth on it.
But how can you evaluate that? You weren't there. I wasn't there.
But the chief of police of the parks was there.
The representative of the state is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But you believe him and you don't believe the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Politico, whoever else.
Correct. That's exactly correct. Yes. I think that the chief of police of the parks in Washington, D.C. has, and I can't imagine he doesn't have a political agenda, but there is no credibility for these other news sources at all because of stories like this and because of a 20-year history of stories like this. Let's go back to Dan Rather with his fake but accurate memo about George Bush being AWOL. It was proven to be a fraud within a few hours of it being posted. Did he retract it? No. Did they ever retract it? No. Does he retract it now? No. He still stands by it. It was a made-up lie. And whether he knew it was a lie when he ran with it, he certainly knew it was a lie after he ran with it, and they made no correction. And this is one of millions of examples by this point, I would think, of this kind of not just bias, not just slant, and not just perspective, the willful suppression of news stories or elements of a news story that might reflect favorably on Republicans, or the suppression of any elements of a news story that might reflect negatively on Democrats. And all you have to do is look at the difference between how Brett Kavanaugh and Joe Biden have been treated regarding the allegations from women of sexual misconduct in the past. And I could go in and do this all day, but there's no reason to. Of course, I believe the police chief more.
The other element of the story that Mollie Hemingway takes issue with, and she shows how every major news outlet reported that tear gas canisters were deployed by the park police or by some law enforcement on the scene, whether that was Secret Service, park police, or someone else. And she says, if so, and she's quoting someone else, I think, from Twitter, but she says, if so, it would be the first time in history that law enforcement officers deployed tear gas canisters when they themselves were not wearing gas masks about a half an hour before they expected the President of the United States to walk through the area. In other words, it would be a really bad idea for a variety of reasons to deploy tear gas canisters. And in fact, what they deployed was smoke canisters. However, the park police, Gregory Monahan of the park police, the acting chief, said that they deployed smoke canisters, agrees with Hemingway, but also said that they deployed pepper balls. Pepper balls are a much more targeted kind of irritant that don't spread over wide areas, as you probably know. But Bill, isn't it kind of a distinction without a difference? And somebody who was in the crowd who may have felt an irritating effect in the throat or eyes could say, well, those must be tear gas canisters. And what the conservatives are doing is what they always do, which is argue over the fine points of detail rather than grasping the overall impression that the representative of the state was putting down the individual peaceful protesters.
If I did not have a high opinion of President Barack Obama, and I live in Los Angeles, and he visited Los Angeles many, many times. And during the occasions when he would come to Los Angeles for a fundraiser, let's say, not on presidential business, not because the president needed to be in Los Angeles as the president, but to chum up with his Hollywood pals and raise some more money for his campaign and for his party. Whenever he would come to Los Angeles, his entourage would require the stopping of traffic on essentially all of the freeways that were connected with his route. And this would delay people in Los Angeles by sometimes 3 hours in terms of getting home. Now, do I think that that's imperious? I do. And do I think that it's unnecessary? I think in many cases, if not most cases, it was. But do I consider it to be an attack on me personally in order to censor me, or an attack on me personally because he disagrees with my politics? I do not. And that is the fundamental difference here. The president of the United States cannot walk through a park without security. And to say that this is a form of silencing dissent is putting a little bit of a fine point on it, I think. I think it's overselling the point because I think the point is ridiculous. The president has a security cordon that goes with him wherever he goes. And everybody knows it. And to say that because, look, if the president had stayed in the White House and deployed these forces, these so-called forces of tyranny and oppression into the park, just to blow people back, just to push them back. You got a different story there. But when the president is making a walk to a church, which is a symbolic act, which he's allowed to do, in fact, is expected to do, what do you expect other than this, especially when you find caches of lethal weapons? If you don't think a brick or a frozen bottle of water is a lethal weapon, then you're not familiar with the laws of physics. And to say that somehow this is targeting a demonstration is ridiculous. And the press knows it, which is why the press didn't report on the discovery, whether they got it in their original reports. They could have done a follow-up and say, oh, well, as it turns out, there were supplies of riot material and rioting materials and weapons and so on. And it does seem to be an error on our part that the police deployed tear gas, because I don't believe police have ever been issued tear gas canisters without tear gas masks for obvious reasons. And they could have corrected these things, but they did not. And so now we know, what we already knew, why I already knew the answer to this question, barring some miraculous breakthrough or change of circumstances that would be a genuine mystery. I already knew whose side was right on this when I heard that the police chief in charge of the operation said that we found caches of dangerous materials en route, and we cleared people out using smoke, which is about the least invasive method of clearing a space that is available to us. It is the lowest possible form of coercion, and the coercion followed the president, and when the president moved, it moved away behind him.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are glad that you took an opportunity to listen to this little bit of civil dialogue and consideration of news of the day. Such conversations are possible only because of the members at BillWhittle.com. If you've not yet become a member, go to BillWhittle.com and click that big green Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.